How soon should children be given smartphones in today's technology-obsessed society? That's a question parents are being forced to answer as smartphones invade nearly every aspect of our lives. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal explores the impacts smartphones and social media can have on children and why it's so difficult to control kids' usage as tech companies compete for their attention. Dr. Jerry Bubrick is the Senior Director of the Anxiety Disorders Center and Director of the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Service at the Child Mind Institute, and he joins me now. Welcome, Doctor.
Hi, thank you.
So this is such a burning question, but give us a sense. What are some of the big concerns of parents when they're trying to decide whether to give their child a smartphone?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's so many questions to think about. You know, sometimes we think about, well, maybe at a certain age we should give our kids a phone. At 13, you should have a phone. But I know a lot of really immature 13-year-olds who can't handle it. I know a lot of really mature 9-year-olds who can. So it's less about the age and more about their maturity level, their understanding of the limits of what can be used on a phone. Do they typically lose things? Do they not lose things? So there's a lot of different parameters to think about.
So how responsible the individual child is, more so than the actual age.
Correct.
So once a child does have access to a smartphone, what mental health risks are there for a child?
Well, it kind of depends on the age range, right? For younger kids, you know, for kids between the ages of 1 month and 18 months, there's, you know, for screens, for watching shows and movies, there's no beneficial effect whatsoever. It usually just buys parents time to take a shower and do dishes. For kids between the ages of 6 and 11, the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests 1 hour a day is sufficient, but a lot of kids will balk at that because what can you really get done in an hour?
Sure.
For everyone else, it's 2 hours or less per day. And then there's a lot of parameters to think about in terms of how responsible can kids be in that time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the mental health issue, I think, is for parents something that looms very large because we've all heard various stories of the ways in which kids can negatively be affected by what happens on these devices.
Right. So if kids can abide by the 2 hours a day recommendation, they are less likely to have, they're more likely to have increased self-esteem, increased confidence, lower rates of anxiety, lower rates of depression. But when kids go beyond those 2 hours and they're spending 3+ hours a day, and we see reports of 10, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day, we see the opposite effect. Decreased self-esteem, decreased confidence, increased anxiety, increased depression, harder trouble sleeping.
And why is that? Is it because they're just sort of disconnected from reality?
Yeah, and with anything, like, you know, as parents, we always want to talk about having balance. You know, you have some after-school activities, you see your friends, you spend family time, you do your homework, and you have screen time. For kids who negate all those other things and it's only screen time, they are getting themselves caught up in this kind of underworld of social media, and they lose touch with everything else.
Well, how can parents monitor and control smartphone use to limit some of the risks that you just outlined?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think there's a lot of things parents can do. One of the most important things is parents need to be up to date and up to speed about the language and the kind of the culture that exists on social media.
It changes so quickly.
It changes so quickly, but if I were to say to you, I just joined the Facebook, you're instantly going to know that I have no idea what I'm talking about.
The Facebook, yes.
Therefore, anything else I say is completely moot.
Right.
So I have to be caught up to speed on what the language is and know the lingo. There have to be clear guidelines about when media screens are allowed and when they're not allowed. Some families will do, including mine, there are no screens at the dinner table.
Yes. Same at my house, yeah.
And the same thing with homework. You can have your screens when homework is done. Right? Because if you have your screen before homework, then you're not so likely to get your homework done in a timely way.
So things like that, setting down some ground rules and allowing that child to understand these are the ways in which you will be allowed to access your phone.
And we always encourage parents to have a conversation with kids that they will have access to their passwords so they can go on and monitor and make sure that what they're doing online is appropriate. Because so many kids, especially teenagers, will be quick to impulsively act and impulsively respond to something, impulsively send a picture without thinking through the consequences.
Sure.
So parents really need to be able to monitor that and help teach.
Right. I can only imagine, though, the rejoinder to that, which is, oh, you don't trust me, Mom?
Trust is something that has to be earned.
Right. Okay. It's a very dad and mom response. Are there any common overreactions from parents about the impacts of smartphone use on children? Because I know sometimes, when I see that clock ticking and I'm watching the kids who are remaining with their nose to the smartphone or their nose to the screen, I think about all these things that you've just mentioned, the mental health risks that are involved, and I do have a tendency to then say very strictly, that's it, no more. We will have no screen time on this particular day, and that's it.
Yeah, again, I think it speaks to balance.
Yeah.
I think if the kids are only spending social time on their screens, then they're missing out on that face-to-face, they're missing out on the real-life experiences, they're missing out on going to the movies because they're watching it on their phones.
Sure.
So I think as parents, we want to try to understand that kids need their screens. It's part of their social understanding and their social identity, but it only needs to be a part of that identity. It can't be everything.
Such a complicated world we're living in, Dr.